we're discussing what effects social security system has on poverty, and also the different conditions for implementing them. I'm standing here with Marion Ouma, program coordinator for Africa Platform for Social Protection. And I wanted to ask you, Marion, how does the politicization of social protection manifest itself in Africa?
I think first it's with the constitution making process, and but many countries are now redeveloping or redesigning the constitutions that they had. I think many countries after independence, they had the same constitution that was inherited from the colonial masters, if I would say that, or just developed after that. But then now we're having a redesign of most country constitutions. And what's key now is that many constitutions, and the constitutions that are being developed now, are capturing the economic, social, cultural rights as a right. It's actually being put in the constitution, and many countries are writing the constitution with that as a right. That people have a right to social security, they have a right to economic security, and cultural security too, and rights. And so that's one way in which this is happening. We've seen that in South Africa is a classic example. And in the constitution of Kenya now, we have a whole section on economic social rights, which are guaranteed by the state. Tanzania is in the process of writing its constitution, and we're seeing that coming up a lot, and the civil society is bringing that up a lot. That's one way. And then I think the other way is in the policy-making process, in legislation, in law, in coming up with policy that then drives or is the backup to the programs that are being implemented. And Cote d'Ivoire has developed policy, for example, that's very inclusive. We've seen that in the policy documents of Sierra Leone, in the policy and the legislation, which are then becoming law that the government then uses as a backup to do social protection programming. Another thing is in party manifestos and the election agenda, it's becoming very clear that social protection is starting to become an election campaign tool and something that people are talking about. It's no longer about just get us elected, we will do this for you, but people are actually asking for political parties to be able to put it in their manifesto, to be able to commit themselves to it in their manifestos, in their party agendas. And that's one critical thing in terms of politics, because then you elect the party that then you feel will represent your needs in terms of social protection and be able to put the social protection programs in place. And so those are just like three ways in which we're seeing the politicization of it. And I think also citizens are starting to ask, where is the money you said you put in social protection? And I think that's a political process, usually a political process that shows a democracy that's growing. And so social protection has been able to build on democracy, and democracy is contributing to social protection too, and the politics of social protection. Sometimes people argue that you cannot politicize social protection, but social protection needs to be politicized for it to have a high priority agenda. And we're seeing that starting to happen a lot in Africa. Yeah.
And what would you say, can you see any current trends in social protection right now on the African continent?
Yeah. I think we're moving from a place where we had multiple small pilots in countries to building national systems of social protection. A classic example is Zambia, where there were multiple social protection programs, cash transfer programs, divided into many districts. But then the government of Zambia is starting to consolidate all those programs into a national system. And that's one trend that's happening, because governments, it's really tiring. It's a waste of resources when you have multiple programs running in a country rather than having them consolidated into one system. So that's one trend that's coming up. Another one is as I have talked before, the politicization of social protection. It's starting to happen. And then also the critical is governments are putting the money in social protection programs, something that wasn't happening a while ago, because mostly social protection programs are being funded by donors, DFID, UNICEF. They're putting the money into programs from donor, multilateral, and bilateral corporations putting money into social protection programs. But then what's clear now is governments are putting their own, or tax money from tax, actually public funds. Governments are putting public funds into social protection programs, which is very key because then it shows ownership by the government. It's helpful in building state citizen contracts because then I can ask, what is my tax being used for? It's helping to build a state citizen contract, which is very critical for the success and legitimacy of social protection programs. Another thing that's happening within the continent is now I think the discourse is slowly but surely coming down to the citizens themselves. Previously, social protection was this thing that nobody understood. It was mostly talked about by donors and citizens, and the rest of the people didn't know what it was. They couldn't even tell what social protection is, and they would ask you, what is this? But then slowly the debate is being brought down, and there's a lot of awareness now being created at the local level, at whatever level, and people are starting to talk about social protection. In Tanzania, for example, you would be surprised at how much people and older persons can't talk about social pensions, because the debate is now being brought down from the boardroom to the household level, where the benefits are supposed to be, and that's really exciting. It's really exciting to see that happening. Yeah. And
taking that into regard, what do you see are the main challenge on the horizon for this process?
I think it's we'll always talk about limited funding and prioritization. I think Africa is a continent of paradox. A lot of luck, but then plenty at the same time. It's really paradox. It's really a paradox, and you have governments that have resources that they have to spread their resources into various programs. You have infrastructure development in terms of growth. That is one thing that we cannot escape from, because roads have to be built. We also have an investment that government has to put in basic services like schools, education, health, and that kind of thing. But then there is also social protection. So the challenge is about prioritization of social protection to be at the same level. Many governments are actually thinking and have actually put a lot of emphasis on economic growth with the fallacy that it will trickle down to the rest of the people, but it hasn't happened. Therefore, social protection, the prioritization of social protection to a high level, as is economic growth, then has to be looked at within that context. That's one challenge that governments will have to think about and really prioritize social protection. I think the other challenge is about coordination. The coordination of social protection, which is very clear, and as I said earlier, there is the putting of programs into silos, many programs into silos, and they're not talking to each other, they're not relating to each other, and that's one big challenge. And you have also a lot of prescriptive ideas coming from. What I would say is the ideological debate that we talked about earlier in the day is actually being fought in the low-income countries. That's when you have this organization coming and saying, no, it has to be older person. This other one coming and saying it has to be children. This one saying it has to be people with disability. And you have this one saying, no, it has to be the youth. And that's really, it's confusing to governments. And so I think the harmonization and coordination, even at international level, has to happen for it to become a reality at the national level. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you
very much.
Yeah. Thank you.